Outline of this talk, what I'm going to talk about today. So I thought to just give you a brief introduction to the study, very superficial, and what we have thought about how we implement the study in the conception phase, thoughts we have made ourselves to get to reach out to as many people as possible and to recruit as representatively as possible. And things, of course, we had to adapt throughout. So things have changed, and I will talk a little bit about it. And also I thought to tell you a little bit about our sub-studies that we have implemented and things that have worked well, and maybe some pitfalls also. We should not forget the nightmares. And then there are the methodological approach. I think you've learned quite some in the past few days, but I just thought to, on the example of our studies, to just tell you a little bit about it, what we have thought was good to do on maybe smart things and how we wanted to collaborate with other people, and that might also pose both chances and challenges. And we are going to talk about the dissemination and some general considerations, and I hope it's not too redundant with what you've learned already. So, like I said, a short introduction to the study. So DREAM, some might have heard this also already. So DREAM is really about, it's a prospective cohort study where we targeted pregnant women and their partners from the Dresden area. It's a population-based sample. It's not entirely representative, but we tried to recruit all pregnant couples in a certain period of time. And what the overall aim was to examine the prospective impact of parental work participation, working conditions, and also gender role distribution on family health, because there are, of course, equality issues related to that, but also how families allocate their roles may also have implications for their health, and this we don't know so much about. But also what I will mainly focus today on is also our focus on perinatal mental health. So we ended up recruiting 3,860 individuals between 2017 and end of 2020. And as I said, we have several sub-studies, a qualitative, endocrine, epigenetic, and also some COVID-19 sub-studies. And here you see the design, the overall design. I just mentioned Corona, but this is not depicted here because as this design gives the longitudinal course of the study, and the Corona sub-studies we had to do obviously when the pandemic hit. So this is more like a cross-sectional glimpse. We took 2 assessment points. I will talk about it later, but so don't be surprised that you don't see it here. And this is just to give you an overview of the design, and I'm going to talk more about the sub-studies later. So just to give you the impression for now, this slide. So like I said, what did we do to implement the study, and what thoughts did we have to reach out to people? So in the beginning, the main recruitment channel was the information evenings of the hospitals. I don't know, it might be different in your countries, but in Germany, it's like this, that the hospitals have the rivalry they want to have because it's connected to money. So they want to have the parents have their child in their hospital. So they have information evenings and provide delivery room tours. So we went there, or the recruiters mainly, and talked and had a small presentation at each information evening, because that was also an opportunity to reach both parents. Most of them times when you meet pregnant people, you don't reach the partners, and we learned that at the information meetings you would reach both the whole couple. So that's why we went there, and also we wanted to also get the high risk pregnancies. So there was also prenatal ward at the university hospital. Someone went there regularly to reach also the high risk pregnancy couples. And we went to birth preparation courses, yoga classes, all sort of things. And I put it on the slide so you can see what we did. We had passive recruitment on the news magazines and like in the papers. We really tried to promote the study as broadly as possible. And just to give you an impression, like how expensively this is. So we had 6 recruitment appointments per week. It ranged between 4 and 11, and per appointment we needed 1 till 2 recruiters. So that was really extensive efforts we had to put into recruitment. And to give you, I don't know whether you got it from the list, but there's the study protocol. You can look at it, and there we describe also some of the procedures. And you will see I put some QR codes for papers. So if you're interested, you can scan it, and the papers I will show you during the talk, you can access them via these codes. So just very briefly, the sample, like I said, we wanted to be representative, but that's not so easy when you go out and don't just like we did. So because we went to the information evenings, we mainly reached first-time parents, so that was 80% of our sample. And as is often the case in such epidemiological studies, there was a relatively high level of education. So more than 54% had a university degree. And like you see here, I don't know about your countries, but that's relatively typical for Germany. Men were working more. And also, even though almost 87% of the men were planning to go on parental leave, compared to the women, they only plan to go on for 3.5 months, whereas the women would do 14 months. And yes, what's maybe interesting to see, because the original DREAM study, which I will talk about later on about the prolongation, we had a relatively good compliance over time, and then we needed a new consent when we got new funding for the extension of the study. And there was a pretty large drop, because people had to fill in new papers and they had to think about again whether they want to keep on participating. Plus, they might have gotten a new child, and so it's really a time when that was around the child was 3 years old, where we had some drop. But we decided at that time not to say, okay, only those who completed T5 were eligible for T6. So we again asked everyone at T6, and as you see, it was 23% of those who maybe did not fill in or did not send their consent at T5 were then again participating in T6. So one learning was to ask again. So we did not have money in the beginning to reimburse the participants, especially not of the main study. So we tried to be very creative and bought small gifts that we could send to everyone or hand out to everyone at the respective time points. And then also we have some collaborations with external providers and stakeholders to sponsor a monthly lottery. So you see some examples. I guess you can't read it because most is in German, but it's like a zoo and a baby photographer. So we try to tailor it to the needs. Also, when we do the lottery, we try to be a little bit also, not leave it all to luck, but we also try to tailor it a little bit, that the newborns get maybe a baby photography, or that older children get something to play with. So this is something that the participants can have and look forward to. And we really got some good feedbacks, especially the things that are for the children themselves from T4, the gifts. The parents appreciate that, especially when the children are happy. So now to come a little bit to the sub-studies. I don't know whether you talked much about it already, but there's, of course, many good reasons why one would pursue a multi-method approach. So you would, the one thing you can study a phenomenon from the different aspects of a phenomenon. And also, of course, each methodology might have their pitfalls. And so they can balance, like for example, quantitative and qualitative approaches may balance out the limitations of each of the method. And we hope to get a deeper understanding of interrelationships and processes, and maybe also when we apply many methods that we can have greater confidence in our findings. But that sounds so great. Of course, not everything was planned in the, or I don't know, of course, but what was only planned in the beginning was Dream Talk. I'm going to show you soon. The other studies came after some time. Dream Hair, the endocrine sub-study, we started planning in the first month when we had kicked off the main study. And so things were really developing as we were going. You see another depiction of the sub-studies, and you see that Dream Talk, like the qualitative sub-study, has 25 participants, and in our endocrine sub-study we have now 671 parents plus the children. And here the Dream AP study is, we are still collecting data. We are targeting 300 parents and their children. And in the Corona sub-studies, we have more than 1,000 participants, and in the qualitative sub-study, 7. So let me show you and talk a little bit about the Dream studies. So I briefly said in the beginning that we were interested in this role allocation, and many couples, when that might be different again in your countries, but in Germany, it's still pretty traditional. And even though couples might be relatively equal in their role distribution, how they, whether both work or do the household and stuff like this together, when they become parents, things develop a little bit differently, and then they fall back on more traditional roles. So women tend to stay at home and take more of the household chores, whereas the men do more pursue the paid employment. So we wanted to then look into so-called egalitarian couples who share all these tasks relatively equally, and wanted to see what are their motivational and success factors, and how satisfied are they with such a family model, because it's not representing majority. And also, how do they fare with this role allocation over time, and do they maintain it? So we did purposive sampling, which is a method in qualitative methodology, where we matched the data. We really were, like, instead of being representative and trying to ask everyone, we were really looking into our data, who did this relatively equal role allocation. We allowed a range between 40 and 60% because we would have otherwise not gotten enough people. So we said that which couples share the household, the childcare, and the paid work relatively equally, have one child in the household, in a stable relationship, that means they're living together. And we said to make it, that's of course debatable, but to to hold some variables constant. So we said we also only ask heterosexual couples. And when we had 25 participants interviewed, we felt we had reached data saturation. That means that new interviews would not give us more information. And you see down, there's like the process you could follow. I won't go into the details, but I just put it here to show you that this is a very time-intensive process. And even though it sounds not much, 25 participants, many hours went into doing the content, the analysis. So just for, maybe some of you have done this already, but I think it's important to acknowledge that. So what was the motivation for this 50-50 split? maybe not so surprising, but you see that some factors related to the profession, that is like maybe career questions, that they wanted equal opportunities as the partner, and also wanted to pursue self-realize themselves. Some factors related to the partnership, like maybe have also something being an independent partner, and think about this as a team effort to found a family. And some factors, 26%, almost more than a fourth, wanted to also be a parent, like their motives related to the child, thinking having two equal parents and not just having one person attachment, main attachment figure. And basic, and also, which is surprising, it's only 8%. Of course, factors also would relate to finances, because it's just also sometimes mundane questions why both need to go and work. So give you just some examples of what they said. Like for the money, I said, yes, to be simply independent. Well, I couldn't imagine just to live off my partner's money, even if it would work, but not for me. Yes, exactly. That's why we have this equal distribution. So to be equal to your partner, and like a person said, as of like the parenting motive, she said, or he. So we said we do it together because he just want the little one to remember us both as good parents later, and not just say, I had a great mom, but my dad was just working and I didn't get anything from him. Or the other way around, I want him to someday say, my parents have always been there for me, and not just my mom or dad. That was also a motivation for me, for both of us, to say we're doing this together. Another person talked about pensions, and so you just get, this is just like, these are just some spotlights, just some to give you the impression, many hours of material, but that's whereas things they told us. And we did very simple descriptive analysis also. And here you see what's interesting is that the women, they more often give reasons relating to their profession, like their own career, why they wanted to have an equal distribution, which basically means that they also wanted to go and have paid employment. Whereas the fathers or the men, they more often gave reasons that were relating to their parenting role. So now I would come to the endocrine sub-study, Dream Hair. So Dream Hair is the endocrine sub-study where we use the method of hair analysis to quantify long-term integrated steroid hormones and endocannabinoids in the hair of the mothers, the fathers, and the children. And this is up to 4.5 years postpartum. And we really try to understand and uncover the complex biopsychological mechanisms underlying mental disorders, stress-related mental disorders in this period, and also how this potentially may lead to the intergenerational transmission. And here, as you can see on the left-hand side, that's a very simplified way of showing it, what's the rationale behind this. So stress can lead to an activation of the HPA axis, the hypothalamus pituitary adrenal axis. And that's the neuroendocrine pathway that's best known for the production of cortisol. And that's, of course, good because it's necessary for the HPA axis to that it's activated for survival. But when you have prolonged stress, when you're really exposed to prolonged stress, or when there's a maladjustment to stresses, that can lead to dysregulations in the functioning of the HPA axis. And then this can also affect the autonomic nervous system, immune system, the endocannabinoid system. And so what we know already is that these dysregulations, they may also play an important role in mental health outcomes, and also in the perinatal period. And that, again, of course, could have implications for the child. So that's why I show you this slide, where you see another illustration. You see that the stressors in the that can be present already in the preconceptual period before the child is born. And if there are these dysregulations I talked about, they can also impact its gestational biology, and which then again may have adverse implications for the offspring neurodevelopment. So there's like both a direct pathway via fetal programming when the child is affected in the uterus. So that would be the direct pathway. But we could also think about indirect pathways where the mature mother is affected, and then by her behavior, say breastfeeding issues or bonding difficulties, may again then impact on the child, and then again have an impact on the postnatal period in the baby, but also longitudinal. So these are really ways of how we think this can have an impact. And I also thought to just show you briefly the method that we use in the study. So we, like I said, we do hair analysis to quantify the long-term secretion of the GCs and the ECBs. And when you see these, like where the hair comes out, and the 1 centimeter closest to the scalp represents 1 centimeter hair growth. So like the hair grows 1 month. So when what comes out is what happened, and the secretion of your GCs and the ECBs during the past 1 month. So we can basically go back in time. When you see the 3 centimeters here, you would actually see this, you could have an idea of the stress exposures 3 months retrospectively. And to date, you see the numbers here. There are like almost 600 parent samples analyzed in T1 and T2. And T4 is a little bit less because we send them to the laboratory in batches, and that's how much we have analyzed so far. And what's great with this method is that unlike salivary cortisol, this is more robust to situational factors like circadian rhythm. And it's also relatively, I wouldn't say non-invasive, but it's very little invasive, and highly reliable. And we look how this is, oh, sorry, someone's knocking on the door. Okay. So you can really see how, what happened. It's a promising measure of the GCs and the ECBs as biomarkers of the long-term cumulative GC and ECB exposure, but we're also looking in our lab, maybe there are some confounders that do also impact on it. So I think it's not as robust as one thought it to be, but much more robust than the salivary cortisol. So we recently published 2 exciting papers within this study. And in the first paper, we examined fetal programming of the infant HPA axis via maternal mental health, and then specifically maternal depressive symptoms during pregnancy. What we found is that higher maternal depressive symptoms were associated with higher infants' neonatal hair cortisol, but this effect was no longer present 2 months postpartum. It means that these findings suggest that there was a fetal programming happening via the prenatal maternal mental health. And we would like to see in the next step whether that might also have developmental consequences, like whether you can see it not just in the cortisol, but maybe also in other symptoms or behavior measures of the child. And of course, other studies, like I said, ours is relatively well educated, and we would also like to see it in more clinical samples, whether these findings could be replicated. And our second recent publication examined how hair glucocorticoid concentrations during pregnancy related to the development of childbirth-related PTSD, so like I wrote here, CBPTSD symptoms. And we also saw that prior traumatic experience had higher cortisol and cortisone concentrations during the 3rd pregnancy trimester, which you see below here. And also we found moderated mediation analysis that showed that upon a more negative subjective birth experience, lower hair cortisol and cortisone levels during pregnancy were associated with higher CVPTSD symptoms in the postpartum period. So that means that when we pursue such a psychobiological approach, we believe we yield a more holistic understanding of the influences on perinatal mental health and outcomes. And so we can also advance our existing models of parental mental health. And we can also see how the family members impact each other on the biological level. And it sounds maybe very surprising to you, but everyone could even think about pharmacological treatment. And in the perinatal literature, that's not really the case, but there was outside the perinatal literature, there were already some good successes in the administration of the hydrocortisone to prevent development of PTSD symptoms. So that might be something we can look forward to in the future at some point. So why does this importance? Luisa Bergunda, I think many of you know her. She just wrote an editorial about it. So if you want to, please check it out, and she can explain this much better than I do. So then I would like to talk a little bit about the Dream EP. It's Isabel who sits with you. She's the PhD student in that study, so she can tell you all, fill you in with all the details I'm not mentioning today. So there's just give a very brief introduction to it, that we know that maternal stress levels during pregnancy, they can have really long-lasting effects on the development of the child. And that's what I already mentioned. We also call fetal programming. So that there are epigenetic signatures such as DNA methylation, and then they can really explain, or we think they can explain, by how this early life stress in utero can literally get under your skin. So, and there are the first studies that emerged, they show that early adversity in utero can have an impact on psychiatric symptoms and impact on the biological stress symptoms. But so far, we basically mainly know about there's mainly studies about prenatal stress and also the epigenetic state at birth using cord blood or looking at placental samples. So that might be maybe of transient nature. And so what we want to do in EPI, we also would like to see if we control for the prenatal stress, how is maybe also both parents' postnatal environment, can that also have an additional impact, and also how do the children develop over time. And here also, again, we really want to look at the work stress, because as I said, that's one of the main foci of our study Dream. So I mentioned it already. So we target 300 triads, mother, father, child, from the main Dream study. And there's a lab appointment with the stress paradigm that we conduct. And there we both take the saliva samples to see how the acute cortisol output is going, and also to process the DNA and the epigenome, but also we again take hair samples of the parent and the child, and we let the parent who comes to the appointment fill in questionnaires to know about the child's general health, and also some behavioral assessments we take, like from the perspective of the parent. And here we have some money we can give them for the effort, because that's a little bit more extensive assessment. You see, it's a picture from the stress paradigm. So what's going on is that you see these magnets here in the corner. So the child is instructed, oh, the one color belongs to the one animal and the other to the other, and let's see how fast you can do it. And you can, if you're doing it well, you can win some stickers. And we already know that Isabel is doing this, of course, and she she will follow the child and then see and adapt as fast as the child is doing it. She will always set this traffic light accordingly that the child won't make it. So it's really like we induce the stress. So the child will always feel, first it turns to yellow, and then a big buzzing sound comes and it's red, and the times run up. And so in doing this course, when we induce the stress, we take the saliva and see how the stress responses in this acute situation. And so in the what it says here, non-reinforcing language and negative feedback. So the experimenter would not really say something, or only say, oh, now you should do a little bit better, and now soon your time's up. So to stress the child more. And when you're done with the experiment, and the experimenter would say, oh, sorry, I did a mistake. Actually, the traffic light was wrong. Sorry, let's do it again. And if you want to, you can finish the task. So the child, we would like to avoid the child staying frustrated. So it can, in the end, do the task if it still wants to. And then each child gets the stickers. Yes, so the last sub-studies I'd like to present are the corona sub-studies. Like I said, these are, even though we have two, they are cross-sectional, because we asked everyone in in May 2020, we asked everyone who was participating online that they would fill in the questionnaires. Because at that time, I'm sure you all remember, school were closed and daycare was closed. And as we have this focus on also the occupational environment, we were wondering, how do parents cope with the situation that maybe they have to combine taking care of the child and also keep on working. So we asked them how things were going, and also some about their stress and coping mechanisms and strategies. And we also asked a few couples who had the egalitarian role allocation, how they were doing, and tried to interview them, because at least in Germany, there was this saying going that they thought that the women were the loser of the pandemic, that the traditional development was even more in the pandemic. So we wanted to hear whether they managed to maintain their model, or whether this went not so well. So we asked them, as you see, one first in May 2020 and then again in October. And we recently published 2 studies here that are based on these data. And very briefly, I can show you that, not surprisingly, those parents that were exposed to high psychosocial work spectrum, that's from their perspective, right? So they also had high symptoms of depression and also high symptoms of aggressiveness, like irritability, and that was all self-report. And this again that's negative parent-child bonding. This would impact on their bonding to their child from their own perspective, both their symptoms of depression as well as aggressiveness. As you see here, no direct effect from the psychosocial work stress to the bonding in neither of the models, but the total effect was significant because it was mediated by their mental health status. And in another study, we looked at the 2 psychosocial work stress indicators, effort reward imbalance. It means like something that you feel, how much the effort means, like how much do I put down, how much work, how many hours, and what do I get from reward? Like, do I get praise from my boss, or is it a nice way I'm doing it? Because we can put down much effort in your work. If the reward equals it out, one thinks it's still okay. But if there's an imbalance, it's not very healthy for your mental health. And we also looked at the work privacy conflict. That means like whether your work task may have an adverse impact on your privacy. Like, say, especially in the pandemic, right? So if you have to work and you have to take care of your child at the same time, you consume high work privacy conflict. So there you see that both their effort reward imbalance as well as their work privacy conflict would have a negative impact on depressive symptoms, but the resilience could buffer this association for the effort reward imbalance. It means if you score high on resilience, this association would not be as strong. So what have we learned doing all these sub-studies, what worked well and what didn't? I think what we noticed in the, like I said in the beginning, is that the only Dream talk was planned from the beginning, but we didn't receive funding for that in the beginning. So the German Research Council thought we can just do this for free. So we had to do this with an unpaid PhD person, which is of course not very ideal. And like I tried to indicate, that's so much work, and we just had to somehow improvise for it. So if you can, it's smart to include the sub-studies and also try to get funding for everything. And also what we luckily did was that we had a common database from the beginning. So when we had more sub-studies coming, we had one database where we could easily merge the data, because different people are working on different sub-studies. It's not always so easy to combine everything, and sometimes you want to merge data because certain research questions need data from different studies. So that's a very complex endeavor. So definitely try to have common databases. And also, I mean, you cannot do everything, because as you see, it's we look into quite different research questions and really try to shed light on very different aspects of mental health. So it's important, or probably natural, to also include additional principal investigators or experts who really can cover different disciplines. Like, for example, I'm not in any way an expert on epigenetics or endocrinological analysis, so it's very good to complement each other. And then, because when you are many PIs, then it's of course also can be challenging who's responsible for what and who would be like to briefed and informed about what, so that you communicate with each other regularly and clearly talk about the responsibilities, who will be doing what and who needs which information, and have regular meetings also only among the PIs. And yes, cost always an issue, so it's good to try and collaborate with other institutions, where maybe be creative about accessing additional resources and be much improvise with scholarship opportunity, scholarships for PhD students, and external fundings that I'm sure you also have at your university. And of course, you can have all these ideas, but in the end, you need to be flexible, and things just turn up, and then you have to deal with the situation, as we all learned with the pandemic. So much planning is good, but you can never plan everything. That's also when dreams don't come true, because not all dreams have come true, obviously. We also, if you have read the study protocol, which maybe only a few did, you see we also talk about the MBU, and the mother-child unit. We had some plan at some point to also merge our data with the more clinical sample, where we wanted to do some behavior observations and stuff like that. And we ended up not doing that because we didn't have the structure, we didn't have the structural possibilities, and then the pandemic came and it was just not so easy. And we also wanted to do actually like an fMRI study, Dream Brain. There was a postdoc, she wanted to look whether the parental brain changes by watching the child. And this was very, she had very clear ideas, and very, would have meant like that we do ecological momentary assessment, like where you ask the parent very much and send them messages all the time. And this just became too much, and she was also leaving the university. So even though this is exciting, just giving you an idea, and we put really much time down for it to prepare the material. So that's also happens, right? So you also sometimes go in ways that end up not going somewhere. Yes, but let's go back to what we did realize, because we also started, in the beginning, we started out with a little bit more basic statistical analysis, but then tried to become a little bit more sophisticated in time. So I thought to give you a few examples what we did there. So why is that important? Because of course we put down loads of thought how to recruit the people and how to reach as many as possible. But then also you need to also put down much effort in using the appropriate methods, which you've learned about during the last days, because you want to make best use of the available data. And it's the more complex the study becomes, the more complex potential associations. So one example was a study on fathers. You may know that also fathers or expectant fathers may become depressive, and that's like the idea that women have a higher vulnerability to become depressive in the perinatal period, but also fathers have quite a high risk to have a higher prevalence rate of depression during the perinatal period. But there's some ideas that maybe the depression patterns might be different. So it might not 100% resemble maternal depression. So we wanted to look at latent profiles, and this is very brief, but so we did from the EPDS, which measures symptoms of depression. We formed a latent factor on paternal depression, and then also tried, including covariates, and tried to predict membership of these latent, who would endorse which profile dependent on certain predictors. And then we did the latent transition analysis to see how stable are these profiles over time. So during pregnancy, if we find profiles of paternal depressions, how do they potentially develop over time? And here you see we found 4 profiles. So we found the biggest group, that was the not depressed group. They endorsed, that's the green one. So they endorsed nearly none of the of the items of the EPDS. And we also had an anhedonic group. That's the blue line. You see, they especially endorsed items like, I've not been able to laugh and see the funny side of life, not look forward to enjoyment or with enjoyment to things. And we had an anxious and worried type. They were more like blaming themselves and having anxious thoughts. And the depressive type had only 3% endorsement. They scored high on almost all of the items. And you see the results of the latent transition analysis. You see that the not depressed group was the most stable one. So if you were not depressed in pregnancy, you had an 88% chance to stay not depressed, while the depressive class was the least stable. So those only 34% stayed with depressive over time. And the rest to become not depressive was like, you see that here, it's changed there was a range between 27 and 55% to stay in your class or not, and not to switch classes. So there was a high likelihood of remission in the paternal depression class. And yes, so this was again a paper that only looked at the fathers, and so we see more and more papers looking studies looking either on partners, maybe also on partners, or maybe on partners and mothers in parallel. But we believe that more and more it's important to also look at the family as a whole, because they can also, obviously, the parents can impact each other, and also they are like a family system. So this is both from an interventional point of view important to look how does this family system work and where can we intervene, but also statistically, it's really important because they are not, when we look at the influences they have, they are not statistically independent from each other. So, and we should really actually, when we look at parents, for example, we should treat the diet as the unit of analysis. So you see that Lara sits with you, I'm sure. She wrote an editorial about it, so she can tell you all about it. This is just the QR code. So if you're interested in it, she can, this is very brief and she can tell you. So there's one study that where we look at differential predictors of childbirth related PTSD symptoms in mothers and fathers. And we thought, okay, we look at known risk factors for CBPTSD, but also since like that's the focus of our study and now no one has really done it before, we thought to also look at work factors, how they can potentially predict CBPTSD. So, and then we were interested whether we have, whether there are differences of the predictors between mothers and fathers. And now, just this is for simplification, I show you first the predictors of the mothers and fathers, just to make it easy to follow, but this was all estimated simultaneously. So for mothers, you see that as expected, depressive and anxiety symptoms were predictive of CBPTSD symptoms and also over subjective birth experience, low support during birth, and an unplanned cesarean plus the pregnancy complications. And in the fathers, an unplanned cesarean and low support during birth did not predict CBPTSD, but the mother, how the support is perceived by the mothers. And also what was interesting for us is that also high job burden and a low job satisfaction, lower educational level, and expecting the first child, that's the parity, were significant predictors in fathers, significant predictor in fathers, but not in mothers. So here we tested also the differences, and then you see there were really differential factors. So for the mothers, it was support during birth and unplanned cesarean section, and for the fathers, it was job burden. And then I show you a study that Lara is doing, and it's under review at the moment. So she examines the association between mothers and partners' birth experience and parent-child bonding at 14 months and 2 years postpartum. And here, so just to show you a little bit about this model, it's the APAM, Actor Partner Interdependence Model. There we also treat the diet as the unit of analysis, but the individuals are nested. So you can also look at the individuals, and we have an actor effect where the one person, we can look how the predictor of the one person affects the outcome within the person, but also the partner effect, how it affects the outcome of the partner. So P is partner effect and A the actor effect. And you see what we found. We found that negative birth experience here was related to mother-child bonding at T3. This is only the model for the depression in T3. So for T4 was almost the same. And also in the partner, we found that the partner's bonding was, that's 14 months postpartum, was predicted by partner's birth experience. Here, as I said, we only see the depression. So also birth experience was mediated by depression and then affected bonding for each. And if you remember that are all the actor effects. So the dashed lines are the partner effects, and they were not significant. So how the mother experienced the birth did not affect neither the mental health of the partner nor the bonding. So nothing. Oh, sorry, I'm on the wrong side. So you see, this wasn't significant. And the picture was similar for the anxiety, but that the only difference was that it was not mediated for the mothers. So this pathway was not significant, only for the partners. And for PTSD, childbirth-related PTSD, it was not mediated at all. So birth experience in both parents predicted PTSD, but was not, but PTSD did not predict the parents' bonding. Summarizing, both parents' birth experience predicts the bond to their child up to 2 years postpartum, and it's mediated by depression and for partners also by anxiety. So I need to hurry, I think. Yes, so what we also try to do is collaborate with other partners and also other countries, because then you may know that, like I tried to explain a little bit already, that in Germany we still have a little bit traditional role models, especially when you become parents. And in Norway, for example, where we also have collaborations, it's much more equal. So we have next. So we have some collaboration with the ABC study and the Flexit study, where we're gonna compare our data, and also we have collaboration with another dressing study where I show you some results in a minute. And also we plan to do and pull our data with Brise, because while even in Dresden it's maybe a little bit traditional, in West Germany it's even more so the case. So we think that could be interesting to compare data in another cultural context within Germany. So just give you an idea about Mari. It's a smaller study that was conducted a little bit before Dresden, and there we looked at how social support changes throughout the peripartum, and how this is maybe also predicted by personality. And you see that social support, we had this assessed at different time points, a little bit than in both studies, but we could really replicate our findings in both sexes. Social support went down when the couple became parents, and especially in those who in this decline was a little lower in those who were having who were more extroverted, which makes sense, because then you're more, of course, you want to be more together with other people, and then you might also receive more support. But what was important for us to show that what we find in one study is not just like a methodological artifact, but we can replicate it in another study and find more or less the same. Yes, so maybe I skip this, how we disseminated the results, and go more to what we think is important in the long run. I think it's most useful is the active recruitment strategy. We got most participants via the active, but also passive recruitment strategies could be a way forward to reach hard to reach populations, because if you hang out the flyer, maybe people stumble over it whom you wouldn't encounter in certain situations. And it's also important to maybe find a compromise, because as a researcher, you always want to collect as much information as possible, and that would be interesting, that would be interesting, but you need to keep in mind that you don't overburden the participant, because that might again be a problem for the compliance over time. And the more studies we had, the more it was important also to optimize the contact and the recruitment, because suddenly receive letters, a reminder there, and a reminder of the second and the third sub-study, so that maybe have a reminder system that then you can talk about all of the sub-studies and really think about also about the perspective of the participant, how it may be for them when they get all these letters from you and calls. And yes, and sometimes it's of course challenging, because some participants might be a little bit more challenging to be with. Of course, you should always be friendly and try to be very service-minded, and some also request feedback. We did this also for example, for the hair cortisol. We gave them individual feedback whether their cortisol measures are on the average or maybe below or above average, such things to try and meet also the participants' needs. And that's, we write a regular dream news and send them news, what we have found, and try to break it down on a more lay people's understandings way to write them when we publish something, what we have found and what it means, and to also frame it in a way that makes them, that they understand that it's really meaningful what they are doing, and that they participate. And if possible, I would always recommend to reward participation, because that does really do something with the compliance. Yes, and data management is a huge issue because it gets more and more complicated. The larger the study, the more important. And as I said in the beginning, shared databases are key. And yes, so you may recognize some people, Isabel and Lara and Luisa. So it's not just like all about thinking about being smart about things, also about the psychosocial environment in the team. So I think I found that cultivating a good team spirit is really important. Also makes your working day more fun. So what we're trying to do is, of course, having regular meetings, but also having social events. That's it. You see, in my house, we had a summer party. It doesn't look like it because weather was bad. So we sat indoors, but I enjoyed myself. So I hope the others did so too. And yes, of course, I think most of you know we had to be super flexible with the pandemic, and that was very critical for some time. We had to pack everything, and suddenly all the materials that were usually sent by mail, we couldn't send anymore because we weren't allowed to go to the office. But then again, of course, we made laminate from this SAR experience, and then started new sub-studies. So that's what I said in the beginning, not everything can be planned, and that's just one example of the pandemic, but I think many such examples always arise, so one needs to stay flexible. And yes, so maybe last point that this, like I said, wasn't in the beginning planned, the dream on study. So we had to get a new consent, and that I showed you the participation rate dropped somewhat. So I would always think that in the future, I would always think that having it, once you get a consent, if you think a little bit long term, get the consent for the longest period possible. So you don't need to get a new consent all the time. And key, really vital is also to document everything, that because stuff is exchanging and new people come in, so that you have everything written down makes it so much easier for the workflow. And yes, have dreams come true. I like to believe they have. And you see, yes, so dreaming big, I think it's worth it. Not everything turned out as planned, but we still like to believe it went well. And also, you don't see where the road is going, but now we have plans to maybe follow up the children for much longer at sea, and just look forward and also dream together, because I think who's in the car here is really what makes the difference, and that have a great team is key. For me, one of the most important issues. So then that's why I would like to thank everyone, and sorry for taking more time than planned. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Susan. Did you hear the warm applause?
No, I didn't.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you make it all sound so easy. That's helpful. So, questions, comments from the group or from online? Yes.
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you for the presentation. My question is about the collaboration with other studies.
You may want to say your name because the camera is on your.
Oh, on my back. So here is Annalena from the VU. Yeah, about the collaboration with other longitudinal studies, I find that really interesting. And you already mentioned that you hadn't measured the things exactly at the same time point, but still it worked out. And I was curious whether the measures you had used were those exactly the same, or was it just measuring social, I think it was social support with different measures?
Yes, sorry, I had to hurry through a little bit in the end. Could have talked more about it. It was, I can open it again. So there was like, I can answer. Should I share it again? Or do you prefer?
You can.
Sorry?
You can share again.
Yes, so maybe that's helpful. I thought to, yeah, how do I share it? Yes, so I think in general, it's of course helpful if you do have the same measure, but it doesn't need to. You see the again the slide? Yes.
Yeah, yeah.
So it doesn't need to be. Here we had like the personality was assessed with the same measure. Social support wasn't quite, if I remember correctly. Sorry. But I think it's also, you can also work, I mean, you have to look a little bit, it's also face validity, right? So you look at the items, whether they're comparable, and you could also, what you could do is to do latent, get latent variables to see whether you find the same factors and then compare. It's always a drawback if it's not exactly the same measure, but I think if you see that the measures are somewhat comparable, it should be fine. I don't know what Carla thinks about that, but that's our experience, that it was relatively okay. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, and that's what I exactly was thinking about, because of course it's more often than not that you have not exactly used the same measures, but still it would be interesting to be able to compare and replicate in different samples.
Yeah,
so yeah,
maybe more of a conceptual replication than a exact replication.
No, I don't. Yeah. Yes.
So, but we discussed yesterday. So if an effect survives method variation, it's consistent across different methods, then that's another way in which you may be able to gain more trust in the reality of the effect that you're studying. So
yes.
Yeah, there are drawbacks of having different measures. You lose power, but there may also be some wins in terms of testing the boundaries of your hypothesis.
Yes, it's also sometimes could even be a bigger challenge that if it's not measured at the same time point, because as you see it now?
Yeah.
Right, because it could be quite a difference, as you see, for example, personality in the Marie study was measured during pregnancy, and we measured it only after birth. I mean, you can then say, yes, personality is relatively stable. You always thought this before, that personality doesn't matter when you measure it, but we know that also personality can change over time, right? To a certain degree. So these things I would sometimes feel are even more vital to certain measures. Like when do you, for example, mental health can make quite a difference, or childbirth related PTSD. When if you haven't done relatively close measurement times, can also be a challenge. But at the same time, if you think about it, that it should make it, I mean, if you think in the postpartum period, the social support, when we want to make statements about it, we don't want it to be only valid for this point, right, in time. So what we think is also the cool thing about it, that you can make more general statements, and if the results hold over different studies, different time points, maybe then they are even more to trust.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions, comments? No, we were talking yesterday about possible challenges to making causal inferences from longitudinal work, and I wondered, you showed a model where you tested mediation, longitudinal mediation, and I wondered, did you include consecutive measures of all independent and dependent variables and mediators in that model?
You mean with always controlled for the state?
For the cross-sectional associations as well as for possible autocorrelation.
Yes, sometimes we did. I think, do you relate maybe to Lara's paper where I showed the dyadic analysis, or the, it went very fast, so probably it's hard to remember. No, sometimes we did, like for example, Lara's paper where you saw where we compared the bonding from the partners and the mothers. There we controlled for the mediator for the psychiatric symptoms already in pregnancy. So for the status, if you want, the bonding, it's more difficult because, I mean, could have controlled for the, of course, for the T2 bonding, but I think the outcome, Lara, you must correct me if I remember wrongly, but this we only included in the model at T3. So we did.
Lara's here, so she's now grabbing the microphone.
I don't know what you mean with the bonding at T3, but what you said is correct. Like we controlled in that model, we controlled for the previous, for the mental health during pregnancy in the separate model. So in the model with anxiety as a mediator, we controlled for anxiety during pregnancy. And I think it's already so long ago. I think we had one or two like socio-demographic control variables in there as well, education or something like that, that turned out to be significant in correlation analysis. In my second PhD paper, which I'm working on right now with the COS team, which is also an APA model, APA mediation model. There, I actually did two models where also included autoregressive control variables, like did both, one with just normal control variables and then one controlling for the previous time point of the mediator and the respective outcome of the path. So the A path from the predictor to the mediator, I controlled for the previous time point of the mediator for that path, and then compared the results of those two models so that you're actually able to say, well, like if you have a negative birth experience, there's this impacts, or this is associated with the negative change of depression levels from T2 to T3, like depending what time points you're looking at.
Yes, exactly. So the birth experience predicts change.
Yeah.
So it's in depression and.
Well, yeah, in my other model, the second model, that was the one that you showed yesterday, that's the mediator's relationship satisfaction, and the outcome is depression and anxiety symptoms. Yeah.
And for example, parents or partner-child bonding, that may be a variable that is difficult to measure very early on in life, or
this we could have, that's what I meant, what I meant, that this we could have, of course, also included at T2. But this we haven't done here, as Lara just said. And you could, but that would then be a different concept. I think it would be a little bit difficult to include it at T1 because the prenatal bonding might be a little bit different to the
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
But you could, of course, but we haven't done it. You could, of course, theoretically include the T2 bonding, but it becomes very complex then. But like Lara said, in your current paper, you're doing it, so it's possible.
Yeah, we had a bigger sample in the second paper now, like much bigger sample of couples.
Yeah, that's so because it's challenging to do, and it's of course predicting change is like trying to predict a moving target, which is also more difficult than trying to predict a stationary target. So
Yeah.
You need more statistical power. So it's
Power.
it's nice to see how all the effort in building such a large sample pays off.
Yeah.
When you then turn towards answering your actual questions, that you actually have the statistical power to do this.
Yeah, I think power is the one thing, and the other thing is then having the variance in the sample. That's where the sample is maybe lacking a bit when you're looking towards the more clinical symptoms and stuff, because like Susanne said, it's a very healthy community sample overall, where it's getting a bit complicated sometimes. But yeah, the power is definitely there now with a big sample.
Yeah. Oh, great. Yeah. Yes. Another question.
Hello, Suzanne. It's Deborah from Lausanne.
Hi,
I just have
Deborah.
a maybe a naive question from someone who don't have the experience to conduct such long-term studies. Is how do you choose the time points, and do you need the same length between each time points as you need to control for auto correlation?
So the first question, how we did this. So this was a little bit based on experience. I had to cut this. I wanted to talk about where also I came from and stuff, but yeah, as you see, it still was way too much. That was from experience from previous studies where I also did my PhD and my postdoc. That the 8 weeks postpartum, that was the T2 in our sample. It's from experience a nice point, because then like we talk about 6 weeks are like the how's the English term? You know, like the 6 weeks after you gave birth, and then there at least there's in Germany also protection. The mother can really not work, and it's like where she might still have physical things and bleedings, and where it's a little bit it's really the close postpartum period. So that's, and then because we estimate T2 on the expected birth date, so we give say 2 weeks more. That's why from experience 8 weeks postpartum seemed always to be a good time point. In T1, I didn't talk much about it, but that's quite flexible in the study with us, because we recruit pregnant parents. We recruited pregnant parents, so there might be variation. Most of them are in the 3rd trimester, but that's not very exact at that in that gestational week. And why did we have T3 as 14 months postpartum? Is also because in Germany the parental leave ends. If both parents take some parental leave, it ends after 14 months, the paid parental leave. So we thought that's a nice point to ask them again before they go out and work potentially. And so there are more conceptual issues why we thought about it in 2 years. So then we thought that's some stretch it out to 2 years. So we had these ideas more theoretical nature. And statistically speaking, I don't know too much about it. Lara, like she would know that much better, and Carlo, but it worked out, it seems. So it doesn't seem to be a problem in that sense. You can estimate it if the period between the assessment points, they don't need to be the same. It still works. Does that answer the question, Deborah?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Does Lara want to weigh in on the statistical complexities of varying time intervals?
Yeah. No, I was just going to say, like, I think but I think that's a different question from what you were asking. I think for like growth curve analysis and stuff like that, there it's more important, like not from a topic wise, subject related point of view, like which time points do you choose, how Susanne just explained, but like from a statistical point, whether they're the same time apart. But I think even there, it's more important that all the participants filled out the questionnaires at the same time point. And there you have the problem that obviously you send, if they have the paper pencil versions, you send them, or even the online versions, you send them the questionnaire, and then sometimes they take like 4, 5, 6, 8 weeks to complete them, and then you don't have them at the same time, and then you need to argue or control for it statistically that you can actually compare these time points. Yeah.
So also sometimes statistics is forgiving. Often not, but
Yes, but we have done that also with the growth curve analysis, so it's possible. But
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, exactly. But the nice thing of this field of research, so sometimes the birth event is like an anomaly if you want to model longitudinal models, but it's also a very concrete point on which you can calculate the time, and so there is a rational basis, a factual basis for including time since birth as a potential covariate or other control variable, which you can then use in your models, and which is a nice feature of this type of research. So are there any other questions left? No, then we'll thank you again, Suzanne, for your presentation and for sharing your dreams and, well, the odd nightmare, and inspiring us all. So we are going to build new dreams here after we've had some coffee or tea, and we'll see you soon.
Yes, thank you very much and see you soon. Bye-bye.